And so all the sessions will be recorded and uploaded to the Whova site, and all these videos will be available for the next year. So if there's like multiple things you want to go to at the same time, because there's so many great sessions, you have a year to just do professional growth all year round to go back. And if you want to watch every video and every session from this conference, you can. So I'm kind of excited that I can almost get some extra professional development by watching some of the videos afterwards that I missed out on. We just also want to thank our sponsors, NIPSCO, Mary Lee Environmental Center, and NAAEE for sponsoring this conference. There's some just new things that we've been working on to make this virtual conference possible, and it has been a really good weekend. So Arielle is going to be our session leader today, and I'll turn over to her in a little bit, but she is the current Indiana Phenology Outreach Intern and a Butler University biology student. Very passionate about the environment, and especially in understanding how the climate is changing. Phenology and climate change, we'll discuss each of the respective topics, as well as how phenological data can be used to witness the changing climate. The presentation has been adapted for a range of audiences, for children to adults. And Arielle believes that education and awareness are the best ways to protect the environment, which is why she's so grateful to be speaking on behalf of Indiana Phenology. So we will leave probably about 10 minutes at the end of this session for questions. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Arielle.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. I'm Arielle, and so today I'm going to be giving a presentation on Indiana Phenology and just kind of introduce some of our programs that we have. So we provide citizen science opportunities for individuals, schools, and partner sites, and participants have the ability to observe seasonal changes in plants and animals throughout the year. And so today I just wanted to highlight 3 of our offerings: our observation programs, our spring activity guide, and our climate presentation, which I created. To finish out the presentation today, I'm going to be demoing our climate change presentation. It's meant for middle school age children, but it also can be adapted to younger. And then we also have a version that's designed for adult audiences. Oh no, there we go. Okay, so every species moves through a series of life cycle stages, and the study of these life cycle stages is called phenology. And so phenology, it's a very familiar concept, understanding these different life cycle stages, but it's not necessarily a word that a lot of people know. And so phenology is concerned with studying the timing of the changes in plants and animals throughout their life and how they are influenced by weather, climate, and environmental factors. And so these observable stages are called phenophases. So each of the life cycle events is called a phenophase. And popular examples would be flowering in plants, migration of birds, hibernation. Those are all examples. And so phenology matters for many reasons, but mostly phenology affects nearly all aspects of the environment, including the abundance and diversity of organisms, their interactions with one another, their functions in the food web, and their seasonal behavior, as well as their global scale cycles of water, carbon, and other chemical elements. And so seasonal timing of these life cycle events in plants and animals, such as hibernation, migration, flowering, has been linked to the timing of allergy seasons, public visitation in national parks, and cultural festivals. So not only can we study this as a science, but it can be used in everyday life. The timing of phenology is changing. In fact, phenology is an indicator of climate change, since phenology is so closely linked with weather and climate. Change in phenology and the impacts we are seeing include earlier springs, increased wildfires, shifts in specific distributions of species, and the spread of invasive species. And so Indiana Phenology provides environmental education and engagement opportunities with a focus in phenology observation. Oh no, there we go. So some of our programs, phenology observation programs, the spring activity guide, and the climate change program, as I already mentioned. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into each one of these. Oh my goodness, there we go. So we have, as part of our phenology observation programs, the Indiana Backyard Observers, the Schoolyard Phenology, and the Indiana Phenology Trail. And so the Indiana Backyard Observers program is targeted towards individuals and families to make observations in their own yards or neighborhoods. We also have the Schoolyard Phenology, which encourages teachers to engage students in outdoor phenology observation on school grounds. And then the Indiana Phenology Trail program, which helped partners engage volunteers and visitors in phenology observation at their sites. There we go. Okay, so this is once again another slide for that. So all of our programs document phenology in the same way. We use Nature's Notebook, which is a national online database that records phenological data. Makes it super easy to use. So you just record the same plants over time, and it's a checklist of animals that you will see on your walks or your daily observation excursion. And so these are weekly observations, and that's just to help us better understand the trends that are going on. So the more you can record, the more accurate and the more trends you'll see throughout time. So through Nature's Notebook, it's a series of yes/no questions, and so you simply just select yes or no based on, like example, do you see leaves? Do you see colored leaves? It's very easy to use, super user-friendly too. There's a free mobile app that you can use as well as a web interface if you would prefer to use that method as well. Okay, so the Indiana Phenology Trail Partnerships Program. So it helps partner sites study the phenology of common Indiana plants to learn more about the local impacts of climate change. Partners may include parks, nature centers, naturalist groups, museums, and educational or research institutions who may use phenology to engage members in a meaningful citizen science project, document and understand the impacts of environmental change at their site, provide hands-on learning opportunities for students or the general public, engage in education, outreach, or research at their location, and support land and resource or conservation decisions. And so partner sites create one or more phenology walks. And these are paths on their property with plants marked for observation and monitored weekly. The data is added to Nature's Notebook, as I just mentioned, and it is ideal to commit to at least 2 years of participation, and that's just to kind of show the trends within a certain area. So if you have less than 2 years, it's kind of difficult to predict what trends are going on and see how these phenological life, the phenophases, I guess, are being moved back or moved forward, and how they are interacting with the changes in the climate. So how do you become a partner site? So first step is to plan. So you want to decide what your goals are and how to integrate phenology monitoring into your current workload structure and programs. And Indiana Phenology assists by providing advice and resources to help you design a sustainable program. The next step is develop. So you want to select your plants to monitor, create a phenology walk, train staff and volunteers, and develop programs around phenology-related topics. And in this aspect, Phenology is able to provide training opportunities and consultation during the development process. And then the last one is engage. So begin data collection and related programming. And Indiana Phenology is able to answer questions, share resources, and provides periodic training opportunities for project leaders to help you be successful. And so some tips for successful phenology observation programs are addressing an existing need or goal of your organization, be this education, research, outreach, or management goals. Incorporate the project into existing activities, plan for weekly data collection by budgeting time for staff to collect data or to manage volunteer observers, commit to and participate in collect data for 2 years, and use collected data in support of your mission and goals. So the next program that we have is the Schoolyard Phenology program, and this is quite similar to the Backyard Observer program, except one happens in a schoolyard setting and the other one can happen anywhere. And so this program is targeted for late elementary through high school students, and it consists of phenology walk on school grounds and can be used to supplement your science curriculum. Individual plants and animals are chosen for the ongoing observation. Students track easy to observe life cycle stages like leafing, flowering, and fruiting in plants. And once again, you have those yes/no questions as I showed you earlier. Similar to the Phenology Trail program, it's ideal to have participation in this program for 2 years or more. Similar thing as before, just to help kind of show any trends that might be popping up, any patterns. And the really great thing about this program is that it can be used to meet a range of NGSS and Common Core standards in science and other subjects. So the benefits of the Schoolyard Phenology program, students engage in the study of ecology and the environment through developing observation skills while participating in the scientific process, engaging in real-world research and data analysis, learning about the life cycles and the interdependence of species, cultivating a lifelong interest in nature, as well as a stewardship and conservation mindset. Observing and documenting the impact of climate change in their own backyards. And so similar to the previous program, Nature's Notebook is going to be used once again. It's just a great way for all of our data to end up in the same place. And this is a program that is adaptable to classroom goals by including classroom lessons and extension activities, data analysis, or creating a class project with your own place-based research question. So we also provide educational resources, curriculum presentations and training. And so our curriculum resources, we have activities suitable for elementary school, middle school, and high schoolers. These activities can be used in formal classroom setting, but many are also adaptable to other settings like informal. One of our resources is a spring activity guide. We actually have other activity guides on their way right now, so fall, winter, summer. And we also, this is a program that is designed for once a week, 1 to 2 hour program. It's perfect for after school groups, clubs, and homeschool groups and other informal settings. So this is the spring activity guide. It is best for the 3rd grade up. It includes examples of different activity that you will be seeing going on in the spring. It is free and available on our website, and so it just works to kind of engage students, whether it be through crafts, games, and activities. So not just a bunch of words and boring information to children, it would be, I guess, but it tries to kind of get students involved and to kind of understand nature in a more hands-on way. And then the final thing that we have is the Phenology and Climate Change program presentation, which I actually created and will be sharing with you today. So it's designed for 8th grade students, ideally, just because that's when those standard core standards are required by the state through the environmental science. So it's a kind of a way for teachers to knock out some of those standards. So far, it's been given to around 100 students, in addition to an informal children's organization as well. So it can go either way. It can be used for classroom, but I've also presented to youth organization as well. Yeah, so I'm just gonna get started on that. So sorry, I got excited. This would be the demo of the climate change presentation. I forgot to make that down. So Indiana Phenology is a nonprofit organization that works to gather baseline data on leafing, fruiting, and flowering of common native plants in all 92 counties with the help of volunteers just like you. So what is phenology? Phenology is the study of the timing of life cycle events and their relation to weather and climate. So you can see this through hibernation, you can see this through migration of birds, migration of butterflies, but also the pollination and flowering of plants and their pollinators coming in the spring. And so phenology is typically termed as nature's calendar because it kind of helps animals it's kind of this like internal calendar clock that is telling these different species when they have to start performing and acting in different ways. Not only can we see this in wildlife, but humans actually also use phenology, and you can see phenology in humans through most of the time through just agricultural practices. So, harvesting in the fall and planting your crops in the spring. Perfect example of how humans are also using phenology in that way. So this is a graph of phenological data, and it kind of it's used in understanding the breeding season of the tom gray. And so this was able to so you collected the number of singing individuals that you heard in a specific area, and that correlates to the breeding season. And so we were able to use this data and this information to kind of understand a general concept and pattern of a breeding season during 2 different years. And so this makes sense. We wouldn't really see that many changes or shifts in the breeding system or season between 2 years. But if you were to look at maybe 2018 and 1964, you might see that there is a greater shift in that area. Maybe it's further back or even earlier in the year because of a changing climate. And so we are able to use this information to kind of draw these large-scale trends and patterns and understand not only how animals are changing and their actions and behaviors are changing throughout the year and over time, but also how the environment is changing as well. So a brief history on phenology. It actually dates back thousands of years ago, and the first written records were actually found in ancient China. And back then it was kind of used not as a science and something that we like to study and understand more, but as a way of life. And so these ancient Chinese would use different phenological clues that they would see out in their environment to help them understand when it was time to migrate or what type of fruit they could eat at certain times of the year. And so really for them, it was a way of life rather than just something that we find super interesting and want to learn more about. However, we will then move into modern phenology. And while it doesn't seem that modern, it's a lot more modern than ancient China. And so we have Linnaeus and Marsham, who were actually known as the fathers of modern plant phenology. And so Linnaeus, he's a very popular scientist, did a lot within the scientific community, and he was actually one of the first individuals to start recording the flowering in plants. Robert Marsham is actually one of the first citizen scientists. So he wasn't even an actual scientist. He was just a guy who really liked walking around nature and recording what he saw on his walks. And so he was considered the first citizen scientist. Here we have Henry David Thoreau, who was an author actually. So like Marsham, he was not a scientist, but rather a citizen scientist. And he thoroughly believed in recording whatever he saw. He was very much so a naturalist and just enjoyed being around nature. These two individuals are actually related. So we have Nina Bradley Leopold and Aldo Leopold, and they were environmentalists who enjoyed observing different phenological sites that they have set up, and they actually have a lot of data between the two of them because after Aldo passed away, Nina took over his observation locations. And so the two of them have a lot of information, and which is super great because then you're able to follow those trends throughout different generations and understand how the environment was changing from a vast time period. So how can this data be used? So the first one that we're going to talk about is the management of invasive species and pests. And so we can see this in different wildlife and parks that we see. So super important if we know that it's going to be a super rainy year and we're worried about the amount of mosquitoes that might be in certain wildlife areas. It's a great way for us to kind of get ahead of all the flooding and this standing water and figure out how to reduce that mosquito population in a certain area for the comfort of humans. Next one, as I mentioned, the allergy season timing can be predicted through phenology. So using those, trying to help human health through understanding the environment. So if we know it's going to be a particularly long summer, doctors might start recommending allergy medicine sooner to their patients because they can look at these predictions within the weather and the climate and assume that we are going to have a longer allergy season or a worse allergy season than normal. Farming is another way that this data can be used, and so we can use this information to help us understand when exactly to start planting our crops or when we have to start the harvest because of the frost coming on. And so farmers use phenological data and the understanding of the environment and weather quite frequently within their field. Carbon cycling, as I mentioned, these different biological processes that are occurring on the earth are occurring at different times of the year. And so we're seeing a shift in that as well, even at the most basic biological kind of cycles occurring on earth, we're seeing shifts. And then the vulnerability caused by climate change of certain species. And so this is a very large one because there's a lot of concern over the threat to biodiversity because we are seeing that there are these shifts in the environment and we are unsure exactly how well animals and plants are going to be able to adapt to that. So phenology as an indicator. Phenology is very important for climate science, just to understand how we can track phenology and different animal and plant behavior through a changing environment. And so if we have bumblebees that are showing up later or earlier in the year, if we have birds going to their migratory locations later in the year because it's a warmer summer, a warmer year just in general, that all is going to be information that we can use to help better understand the environment and the changing climate, as well as better understand how these different species are adapting to that. So the difference between climate and weather is very a huge concept we have to understand before we can talk about climate change particularly. And so climate is the weather conditions that are expected in a general region at a particular time of the year. So this is a more general term. For example, if we were in Indiana and in the fall, we're seeing that generally it's going to start getting darker earlier in the year and we're going to have lower temperatures. It might not be as sunny as it normally is. So that would be climate, and that's just a general understanding of what's going on in a general location. Whereas weather is a lot more specific and it describes the conditions outside right now in a specific place. So today it's super nice outside and it's super warm, not what we would expect due to our prediction about the climate, but weather is very temperamental. And so that's a big distinction we need to know about, is that our weather is not necessarily always the climate. We can have different shifts depending on the day, the hour, sometimes even the minute. And so that is a huge distinction between the two. So climate change is the change in average conditions such as temperature and rainfall over a long period of time. And so this is looking even past just the general climate of a season and looking to 10, 15, 100 years ago and comparing the different trends that we see, whether it's in temperature, rainfall, or different tropical storm occurrences. That all is information that we can use to help understand how the climate is changing on a large scale event. So what causes climate change? So we have natural pollutants that actually can get up into our air and kind of simulate the same greenhouse effect that we are experiencing that can increase the global temperature because it is affecting our ozone layer. And so we can see that in volcanic ash of volcanic eruptions. And while that is somewhat influencing climate change, we are seeing that a majority of it is being caused by man-made sources. So the burning of fossil fuels is also kind of creating that greenhouse effect and warming up our planet. We also can see air pollutants also getting up into our atmosphere and causing some damage. So those are the main ones that are actually like affecting global warming and climate change. Plastic pollution, not necessarily causing global warming by any means, but it is just another example of how humans are having an impact on our environment and kind of degrading the land and area around us and making it not only kind of gross for humans to live in, but also are uninhabitable for a lot of aquatic species if they were to be living in this water, this body of water. And so just drawing on the fact that we need to start understanding that we are kind of ruining our planet, not only for us, but the other species that live in these areas as well. So how do we see the climate changing? So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is just a long name for basically a group of international scientists that study climate science, have predicted that we will see a temperature increase of about 34.7 degrees Fahrenheit by 2030. It's also expected that we're going to see increased drought and different like shortages in water. And so this is going to be caused by changing precipitation patterns. So in some areas, we might not see as much rain as we once did, and that will cause this drought or the shortages in water, possibly even wildfires as well. But in other areas, we're actually predicted that we will see increased levels of precipitation, such as flooding, possibly causing erosion, and an increase in tropical storms. And so it's very important to understand that these threats will not all be equal in every place of the world. So some places you're going to have extreme heat and drought, and other places you might just have torrential downpours. And so it's super important to understand that and also think about how it's going to be a threat to the plants and animals that are living there. If you have a lot of flooding, you might not be able to produce crops that year because they're going to drown. If you have no rain, you might have plants that just aren't getting enough water, and that will kill them as well. And so it's super important to understand not only how humans will be affected, but also how the other life on this planet will be. So if we look at Indiana specifically, Purdue University scientists actually came up with their own list of expected results due to global warming and climate change that they believe Indiana will face in the coming future. And so it's predicted that there will be an increase in temperature of about 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century. Along with that, we're going to see the number of hot days rise. So a hot day is technically classified as a day over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's expected that it will rise. In the past, it was 7 days a year. And by mid-century, it's predicted that we will have 38 to 51 hot days every year, which is a lot, especially when you consider that we're going to have that increase in temperature as well. So we're going to have a lot hotter days and a lot more of them. Makes sense. We're also going to see extreme cold days declining or cold events declining. So if we have an increase of temperature, obviously those cold events are going to be declining. And that kind of correlates with the frost-free season lengthening. So because we will have those extreme cold events, we might have, it's predicted that there might be longer frost-free seasons, which is definitely going to shift different agricultural practices. And then we're also going to see the average annual precipitation rate increase. So they believe that we will have an increase of 5.6 inches of rain every year. So how does this pose a threat? How is this going to affect us and where we live and our everyday lives? So it is believed that there are going to be these shifts in the growing seasons because of that frost-free season lengthening. And so while initially this was thought of as a great thing because that meant that crops could produce more, or farmers could produce more crops each year, it's actually believed that because of those extremely hot days in the middle of the summer, that is going to kind of ruin the belief that you could produce 2 batches of crops every season. So while there still has not been any kind of understanding of how this will exactly affect agricultural practices, there definitely will have to be some sort of reaction to these shifts in growing seasons. And it's believed that that's going to increase food prices, because as we are having these shift in agricultural practices, that's going to be messing with the yield that they are producing, which if we have less food, less crops, that's going to increase the price of what we find in our supermarket. We're also going to see an increase in human illnesses. So for example, with these increase in extreme number of hot days, we are going to see heat stroke being more of an issue and heat-related diseases. But we can also see, and this kind of relates to this invasive species, different zoonotic diseases being carried as well. And so we have different animals that might be moving into new areas, and they can be bringing different diseases with them. So a main one of concern are the mosquitoes that carry diseases in the tropical areas. And while we are having an increase in temperatures further up north, there is concern that those mosquitoes are going to start spreading further up, causing more diseases in humans. Flooding and pollution is also another threat that we are worried about because of that increase in average annual precipitation rate. And so there's a lot of concern about, especially with farming, different pesticide and herbicide runoff because of this increase of rain, and how that will affect our water systems. So we can now look at so we kind of just focused on how this is going to affect humans and what problems we might face. But of course, animals and plants are going to face the same, not the same, but similar issues, because they are also living on this planet. And so obviously this is going to have some sort of effect on them. So phenological shifts focus on the relationship between the environment and one animal. And so that can be looking at hibernation or migration or leafing in different animals, and understanding how that is going to be affected by the changing climate or environment. So if we compare maybe 10 years worth of data on hibernation and the length of hibernation of certain animals, we might see that there are shifts occurring based on a change in temperature, or maybe a decrease in the number of snowfall that occur. And so all that information we can use to understand how our animals are behaving differently. And so that would be a phenological shift. So those phenophases, they're shifting throughout the year. We see maybe the birds migrate earlier or later in a certain season. And so that would be an example of how we are seeing those shifts within our animal and plant behavior. A mismatch so when you think of a mismatch, you might think of 2 pieces of a puzzle, and the 2 pieces of the puzzle always have to fit in at the exact, you have to have 2 pieces to fit in at the exact same time, or else it will be a mismatch. And so that's what we see when we look at 2 animals and their relationship as well as their relationship to the environment. So if we are looking at this bird and caterpillar example, these birds have this relationship with their caterpillar where they know when exactly to come back, so that they can feed their nestlings at this peak abundance of caterpillars. And so that is the relationship between the birds and the caterpillars, knowing when exactly uh, one will be in an abundance so that they can feed their child. However, the concern is that with global warming, that's going to move plant and insect phenology up earlier in the year. So if we're seeing an increase in temperature, of course, these caterpillars are going to come out earlier in the year. And so the concern is that if this bird doesn't necessarily realize that there is a shift because it's still in its migratory location and it comes back at its normal time, you might not have an abundance of caterpillars anymore. And that is a large concern over whether animals are going to be able to adapt or start seeing a decrease in their population size. And so animals need to realize, okay, if spring is occurring earlier in the year, I probably have to arrive for migration earlier in the year so I can lay my eggs earlier and my eggs can hatch and I can feed my babies at this abundance point. And so that's a large concern for a lot of scientists, just making sure that these animals are able to adapt, especially as the changes in the environment occur at a fast and rapid rate. There's a lot of concern whether these animals will be able to keep up and adapt quick enough. And so that is a large concern regarding biodiversity. So what can you do? You can become a citizen scientist. And so Indiana Phenology has two programs. We have the Schoolyard Phenology program as well as the Indiana Backyard Observer program, and both can be used. One can be used in your schoolyard, and the other one you could do anywhere in your backyard or your neighborhood. And so this consists of different phenology walks that you can do, and you track the life cycles like leafing and flowering and fruiting in plants. You can select plants on school grounds, and mark them for repeated observation, and you're going to use a yes/no questionnaire, which will help you record your data. And you want to record this at least once a week if you can, which will help us understand the trends and patterns within your area. And so this is that yes/no table that I mentioned earlier. And so you can just track different things like leafing or flowering or fruiting of different plants. And so it's a great way and it's super helpful. And even if you don't understand necessarily what you should be looking for, Nature's Notebook gives you different descriptions of the plants or the fruits that you might see on a specific plant, or what a young leaf will look like compared to a mature leaf on a plant. And so even if you're not super sure, it will definitely help you out and give you different it will help you out and give you different descriptions of what you should be looking for. And the really cool thing about Nature's Notebook is that this data can actually be used by international scientists to help them kind of conduct these large-scale, broad experiments, which they might not be able to do on their own because it's a very costly process. And so I pulled up a couple of the previous experiments that have been conducted with Nature's Notebook data. So a couple of them: plant phenology and global climate change, current progresses and challenges, future changes in fire, weather, spring droughts, and fall springs across the United States national forests and grasslands. Does an early spring indicate an early summer? Common milkweed flowering date shift in response to climate change. So as you can see, it covers a range of different topics, and it can be used from anything for understanding phenology of a specific species better, or examining climate science on a larger degree, thanks to all the different data that we can collect from different areas of the state, the country, and in some cases even the world. So I want to thank you so much. And typically at this point, I would give a Kahoot, because kids really seem to enjoy Kahoots. And Yeah, so that would be a demo of the climate change and phenology presentation that I give. Um, does anyone have any questions?
Arielle, just wanted to thank you for this presentation. Definitely have some time for questions. I want to thank Sarah too, just for putting some of those resources in the Zoom chat. Since there are resources in the Zoom chat, you guys can keep adding to that. And I will make sure the text of the chat gets attached to the Whova app. So those resources can be viewed after this conference also. So keep adding to the chat and start asking some questions. Or if you don't have questions too, just when you look at phenology in your own area of Indiana or wherever you're located, just for the people in here, are there any things that you guys are noticing about where you live as far as when things bloom, when certain animals arrive? What are you guys noticing in your areas?
I have a question. Sarah had just mentioned in the chat that Project Budburst is a very similar program. Do you know if the two communicate, if they share data?
I do not think so. They might also use the Nature's Notebook, which is like an online database, a national database. And I know like a lot of different phenological organizations use Nature's Notebook, including different like there's different branches of like the like Arizona phenology or things like that, like similar to Indiana phenology. And I know that a lot of those organizations also use Nature's Notebook. So I would assume that they would as well. I think it's pretty prominent database, but I'm unsure. Oh, Paul asked a question. Have you done a parallel study to Aldo Leopold's phenology study? I have not personally, but I think that would be super interesting.
And there's also a question before Paul's too. It says, since I'm at a school, is there a problem not having data when the schools are closed?
Not necessarily. I think that as long as it was kind of consistent before, it's kind of one of those things where like if you need to take a break, it's okay to take a break. It's not the end of the world. It's not like you're, like actually collecting this data to use in your own lab. If that was a case and you still want to get involved, we do have the Backyard Observers program, which allows you to record data from your own home, if your own backyard, or somewhere in your neighborhood. So if you were concerned about maybe keeping up a particular species recordings, you could maybe find if you're recording a maple at school, finding a maple within your neighborhood somewhere, or trying to kind of find similar species or individuals to a particular species in a different area. However, it's not a huge concern if you can't keep that up. Obviously, these are excruciating circumstances, not normal, so not the end of the world. But there are other options if you would like to continue collecting data. Yeah.
I've done something at my park, and then also just personally. It's not really citizen science because I'm not reporting it anywhere. But for example, at our park, we do a prairie burn every couple of years, and I'm trying to show people that you should do a prairie burn and the prairie grasses recover. So what I've done since our prairie burn, almost every week, taken a picture at the same location of our prairie to show how the grasses and the flowers and things are recovering. And people have enjoyed seeing those pictures on our Facebook page. They like to see those changes. And then I've always wanted to do, sort of document one tree throughout the year. So a few years ago, I picked one tree on my route where I walked to and from work, and I took a picture at the same location on most of the time, the same day of the week, to kind of just see what it looked like. And then, if I ever want to use those pictures, I could do sort of a time-lapse photography kind of thing in a presentation or something like that. So those are some simple ways you could do something like this if you can't commit to reporting information, or maybe it's a first step too. So
Exactly.
throw that out there for anybody who wants to, sort of dabble in this a little bit.
Yeah, no, and the visual cues are super cool. I started actually just taking pictures because I was like walking to class because that's where my like route is, and I was like kind of just not having time to record, and so I started taking pictures, and I started in September and then until now, and so it was kind of cool just to see like the change in the leaves, and like you just kind of like scroll and it's like you can like visually see it changing before your eyes. It's a really cool way to do it. I really like that idea. Yeah.
This is something that I definitely want to get involved with. We live on 10 acres, and my question is mostly wooded. Is there a place in the notebook to record? Most of it's like a yes/no checkoff. Are there places to record additional anecdotal information? For example, on our 10 acres, we're surrounded by crop fields. Okay, we've got the 10 acres, mostly wooded, crop fields all around. And I know, it's probably only a matter of time before one of those carrots that the developers are dangling in front of us, one of our neighbors is going to bite on the carrot, and we're going to end up with houses in at least one of those crop fields. So that would be a significant change. So if you were recording data and all of a sudden you started having a lot of development or other changes, is there a way to record that kind of information?
Yeah, so you can record additional, I think it's called like additional descriptions about your location, and then you can also do that about like specific plants. So like if you like maybe you have like a tree or some sort of plant that is right next to development, like construction or something, recording that in there. This week they started construction, it's right next to this tree, I want to see how that's going to affect this as I continue on. So there is room for additional notes on there, yes. It's more so we kind of show the yes/no thing because with a lot of students, it's like, well, I don't want to write out a whole paragraph on a one plant. But yes, there is room for additional notes as well, yes.
Thanks for sharing about that, Sam. Anyone else just have some observations from where you live, things that have changed, things that you count on? I know for a couple of years I was mapping out where my morel mushrooms were, or different species of them, and what time of year I found them. And it was interesting that, at least for me, over probably the 4 years that I did that, there was probably a 6 weeks difference in when I found the first one, depending on the year and how warm it was. But I can almost predict once I find the first one at my earliest spot, where I can find some of the morels at other spots, like 2 weeks and 4 weeks past that, and probably when the end of the season will be. And so, wow, this is kind of fun, but I don't know, I walk a lot. I'm not one of those people that goes out and says, hey, I found this many pounds of mushrooms. Like, no, like there's some years where I'm like, okay, 1 mile per mushroom would be nice as far as walking. But part of it may be that morel mushroom season is also spring bird migration. So sometimes I'm, following the warblers in the trees instead of the mushrooms on the ground. But
I'd love to go mushroom hunting with you. My count of mushrooms could probably be measured in grams rather than pounds.
Right. This last year was pretty ridiculous. I got more this last year than I've got probably in my life total. So, and I think the year before that I found like 3. So. And Sam, I'm not going to say the smallest one I found is in the photo session, photos of the app, the one that's sitting on top of a dime. The smallest one I found was probably in my bootlaces that I didn't even know I'd walked past.
Wow.
And it was just like tiny. So.
How long have you been looking for those?
Since I could walk.
Oh.
I've always grown up on property. My grandparents had probably 80 acres behind our house of woods and fields, and my other set of grandparents had 500 acres, including about 100-acre woods. And so I grew up walking their properties and just spending lots of time in the woods. And then here at camp, we have right now about 120 acres.
Oh my goodness.
So
that's awesome.
I've always been around property, which is nice.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So before we end this, we have a couple minutes left. Just another kind of question for anyone. You know, in Arielle's presentation, there was lots of things that we're tracking, whether it's leaves or whether it's birds or, you know, the green out, the, you know, bud burst, whatever. Is there anything that you guys are interested in tracking of going, oh, hey, I wonder, this is something that I see most often. You know, you saw the groundhogs coming out of migration or whatever. Is there anything in your own life that you're interested in maybe tracking in the future or paying a little more attention to? I'll pose this one to Sarah, since she talked about doing prairie burns and stuff like that. We have 5 acres of prairie here at camp. Are there any plants that you track in your prairie as to when they come up? So, like, I know here it would probably be the prairie shooting star, just because that's one of the first flowers I see of the season, if I can find it before the deer do. But are there any, you know, kind of like, oh, this is like my first one, or you know, if I'm down at the wetlands, I'm kind of like, oh, the blue irises are blooming. Like, it's time for summer camp.
I don't record anything, but with my pictures of the prairie, I can kind of look back from year to year to see when I'm expecting the milkweed to start really shooting up and then start blooming. And then, oh yeah, this is the season of the yellow flowers with some purple mixed in. So nothing official, but just kind of, oh yeah, that's what blooms at this time of year. And okay, here it is again.
I like how you just mentioned the color transition. I totally get that, of like, this is the time of the purple, like, especially like the purple flowers, kind of how it starts for us. It's like the lead plant, the bee balm, moves through like the white flowers and then into like the yellows at the end or whatever. So I think a lot of us maybe haven't recorded it on paper, but through our photos, I think even some of us, how we share it on social media, like I could go back through Facebook over probably the last 10 years and chart out some of those prairie plants or some of those plants here at camp or other things. So I think without recording it, we really have recorded it in some ways through our social media, through the stories we tell. There's a lot of stories in our head, but those clues come out as far as when you talk about crops, like those, I think that folklore that comes out as far as like, okay, we plant corn when the oak leaves are as big as a squirrel's ear. You know, or I notice these things happening when the pawpaw flowers bloom. So maybe even in these last couple minutes, what are maybe some of those folklore kind of things or stories that have been passed on through the generations of that you hear of like, hey, when this is blooming, or when you see, you know, when this warbler returns, then it's time for this. What are those things that have been passed down to you guys throughout the years?
Well, I was going to mention, when you were talking about particular plants to track, I probably should be tracking persimmon, because we've got one persimmon tree in particular that last year it was absolutely loaded. This year it didn't produce a single fruit. And I've got some persimmon on some of our other trees so I don't know why this one particular tree was so full last year and there was nothing this year. But talking about folklore, of course, that's one piece of folklore that you're probably all familiar with, is that if you slice a persimmon seed lengthwise down the middle and look inside, it will either, the germ or the seed will either look like a shovel, a spoon, or a fork. And that's a predictor of what kind of a winter it's going to be. You know, if a knife, it's going to be cuttingly cold. If it's a spoon, you're going to be doing a lot of shoveling of snow. And I guess a fork is just kind of in between. A mild winter, I don't know.
Good.
Yeah, just Paul McAfee here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. On a different note, like Sam, I also have 10 acres. And when we moved here 25 years ago or whatever, probably 8 of it was just mowed grass. And of course, we changed all that. And if this thing had been around 25 years ago, would have been just really interesting to note all the changes over the years. And we put in a couple acres of prairie, and every year it's different. And it would be really interesting if I had thought about it at the time to do this phenology. I guess you don't always think about this stuff until it's too late. So yeah, keep encouraging these people to do this, especially when they get started on a project, and just keep track of it because it is very interesting.
Yeah, Paul, we moved to this property 38 years ago, something like that. And most of the 10 acres was in hay. And we started a Christmas tree farm. So, started planting pines, but then we've been out of the Christmas tree business for quite a few years, and I've been planting hardwoods. So now most of it's in woods, but we went through observing the same things where initially, as it was all being allowed to grow up, we had a lot of quail, and now I haven't heard a quail back there in a long time because the habitat has changed. But we're getting different species back there that we didn't have before.
All right. Thanks for sharing. And Paul, I would totally encourage you to keep watching your prairie. Especially if it was planted before, you may see some things coming up through the seed bank that you didn't plant, that are native prairie stuff that will come up that you didn't know was there. So I know the Campback Prairie I've been watching for 18 years now, and I still see new plants every year in there. And some of them were not ones that when we took it from farmland to prairie well before my time working here, were not planted in there. So there's some things coming from that native seed bank that may take 20 or more years to come up. So
Oh yeah, it's very interesting.
yeah. I also love the comment Sarah Wolf made. Paying attention to mask years for oaks and walnuts is interesting, as it's related to squirrel populations too. That's one I also look at for how it's related to deer populations and also deer tick populations. So I know when I was doing, talking about this year, a lot of us are kind of in that off year I did a edible tree and nut walk, and there is not a hickory nut to be found this year. So definitely not a year that's a little bit heavier. So Arielle, any final words from you?
Not necessarily. If you are interested in any of the programs that Indiana Phenology has, I have the website and then the email that you can contact below. But thank you so much for your time and attention today. I greatly appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arielle. Just a reminder, this is recorded, so you guys can go back and watch it. And I'll also put the chat in there so you guys can see some of the resources that will be shared. Make sure you fill out the evaluation. So where it says rate session on the agenda, please leave your evaluation so we can look later. At 12:30, there is a nature-based early education, early childhood environmental education panel, and then field trips begin at 2. If you don't go on any of those, please join us at 4:30 for our Vision 2020 farewell. So it's been great being with you guys all this weekend, and can't believe it's almost over for this year. So we are looking forward to joining all of you guys at Spring Mill State Park next year, November 12th through 14th, where we can see each other in person again. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you later on.
Thanks.